They were the stories that have charmed an entire generation. Truth behind Tom. Grown up with the railway stories, and all their cheerful characters. But the truth behind Thomas and his friends was no children's fantasy. The truth would be horrifying. The island of Sodor, off the northwest coast of England, has emerged from the fog of World War II, relatively unscathed and untouched.
The island's living in England. That's how Professor came to be.
Professor Wilhelm Goetze was born in 1903 in Munich, Germany. A doctor in biology, he became a prominent advisor to the ruling party in the 30s.
Wenn älteren Jahrgänge noch bangen werden könnten, die Jugend ist unverschrieben und verfallen mit Leibwand.
In 1939, as war escalated, he, his wife Olga, and 4-year-old son Hans fled the country.
Ja, ich habe nie einen solchen Befehl bekommen. Ihr habt einmal gefragt, nicht wahr? Am 14. Mai 1942 war der Großadmiral Räder und ich bei ihm.
That's what he wanted people to believe. The fact is, his experiments were hard to stomach even for his own people.
In truth, he had become a prominent figure in the government, but as his work progressed, questions and objections had been raised in the higher echelons of the Reich. His work with genetics and DNA was truly pioneering. The cracking and manipulating of the human genome. What Professor Goetze was most successful in, however, was keeping his history a secret until his death. In an attempt to gain favour among the German hierarchy, Wilhelm Goetze was at the forefront of the government's most fanatical policies. In 1938, he was influential in instigating the infamous Sajbernacht, the Night of Sawdust. But, as his experiments advanced, he became a much less popular figure and soon feared for his and his family's lives.
As soon as he escaped to England, he was banged up here. All locals were nice to him. There was no hostility, and many of them chose to live here after the war.
Following their release, Professor Goetze, Olga, and young Hans chose to remain. After studying under his father, Hans left at the age of 18, splicing of DNA with mechanical implants.
Experiments were hard to stomach even for his own people. He was to live here after the war.
Following their release, Professor Goetze, Olga, and young Hans chose to remain. After studying under his father, Hans left at the age of 18 and went to university on the mainland, studying biology and engineering, writing several pioneering papers about genetics and the splicing of DNA with mechanical implants. He called it biofusion, the technique of manipulating genetic material to splice with mechanical attachments. However, much like his father, the British government became more and more concerned with Hans Goetz's proposals. So he was forced to seek financial backing from home.
His dad left Germany with quite a few bob, so Hans came back. He saw our little island as some sort of refuge where he could work in peace. Soon every nutcase and eccentric was coming over.
By 1962, Hans had set up Sodor Research, a small lab near the town of Alsborough, but soon the enterprise began supplying medical equipment and machinery, and quickly grew to become a large complex comprising its own links to the growing Sodor rail system.
Young Abby Collins from the town was working there when Professor Hans took a liking to her. Soon they were married, and not long after, the town was buzzing with news of her pregnancy.
Baby Thomas was born in 1968. Throughout the early years of his life, he would watch the growing railway network with fascination.
He couldn't get enough of trains. His dad bought him one of the first video cameras, and he'd be on the platforms every day. You can see me in some of those tapes.
Hi, Mr. Hartley.
Morning, Thomas. But he was friends with everyone. He was that simple bloke who could only say where he lived.
Sodor.
But his favourite trains were the old steam engines.
Steam engines were a dying art on the British mainland, but Hans also had a fondness for them, much like his son, and likes to keep them running for our purposes, taking orders from the labs to the growing docks, or to the mainland to be transferred to modern postal express trains. But as the Sodor rail system expanded, it found itself increasingly under the supervision of the new British rail network and appointed a new controller.
Get off my platform!
Sir Topham Hatt. Born into money, he took his ridiculous name to heart and started wearing a top hat all the time. Of course, the islanders had a different name for him.
Fat bastard. You've never met such a cold-hearted as him. He banned all steam engine volunteers and cut most of rail employees. Shut down the branch line and the smaller stations. He was happy to let the railway rust away, just like they did to the main line.
But the fortunes of the railway were about to take a profitable turn, a stroke of luck for the island that would result from tragedy.
Come on, we're gonna be late. What's the time? Thomas, get moving.
Thomas, we gotta be late. Oh, what's the time? No. Thomas, come on. It always hung up.
And into the labs, locking himself in. He wouldn't allow anyone in there. Eventually, his father, Wilhelm, came to see him. In a few days, a major laboratory had been locked down, followed by an engine maintenance shed, which was to become off limits to all. All production was shut down, orders weren't met, but the two Professor Goetzes didn't care. More and more equipment was being delivered daily, but no one was allowed in Shed 17. Questions started being asked on Sodor. Where were the Goetzes? Would there be no funeral for young Thomas? And where was the body?
They'd arranged for Thomas to be transferred to a mainland hospital. He'd been taken to the complex but was never moved by rail. We all assumed the obvious. He was still in lab.
But if Thomas was there, was he still alive? And what was the purpose of keeping him at the complex? Almost a year after the accident, the doors of Sodor Research were reopened. In an open invitation to the people of the island, Thomas rolled out of Shed 17.
It took me a moment to realise what it was I was looking at. when he looked at me and said,
Hey, Mr. Hartley.
it dawned on me what Hans Goetzer and his dad had done. One woman passed out as Thomas smiled at us. I had to run off round the side of the shed.
Are you all right, Keith? As news spread across the country, the world's media rushed to Sodor Island.
They kept trying to interview me. I became a bit of a celebrity.
Controversy on Sodor Island. Questions asked about science ethics.
It's fair to say I was pretty nervous at times,
Joined now by Keith Hartley.
but I think I put on a brave face.
What did you think when you first came to meet Thomas the Tank Engine?
Most of my mates said I looked pretty good on telly. The mayor said I'd represented the people of Sodor very well. It's important to show you're confident when people are asking you awkward questions.
Good evening. An act of mercy or a crime against humanity. I'm joined now by
Even when some of the questions got difficult, I made sure I knew what I was talking about.
What was your reaction when you first met a talking tank engine?
If you can't make an informed opinion, or if you can't string together two words on telly, well, maybe you shouldn't be on there.
There are two sides to this.
Admittedly, the subject matter was a bit bizarre sometimes.
There are some dark forces at work here.
You're all right as long as you can win over the audience.
If they're laughing at you, they're not laughing with you.
The Goetzer family refused to answer any questions. Behind closed doors, the only question they agreed to answer had been asked repeatedly. Would Thomas work on the railway? The response was an emphatic no. Thomas's DNA had been reprogrammed to accept and adapt to the engine structure, using the engine's internal system to maintain his organic functions. What no one could be sure of was how much of the engine was mechanical and how much was organic material. Thomas had been able to move around without coaches, but to work on the railway, his engine would need to be fired up and operated by a driver and fireman. Since no one could be sure how much of the engine was Thomas, the pressure caused by the engine could rupture his organs from the inside, and the incredible heat could boil him alive. Professor Hans and his father vowed Thomas would never work on the railways. Similarly, the two professors were to refuse many requests by people from around the world who wished to be biofused into engines.
There were billionaires offering to pay whatever they wanted to be converted into an engine or some other transport. Train enthusiasts too, and people with terminal illnesses were desperate to be made into trains. But for some reason, the Goetzers refused.
But there would be other interested parties, eager to seize on the biofusion gold mine. The independently wealthy Topham Hatt staged a hostile takeover, and within weeks had bought a controlling share in Sodor Research. Immediately, the policy of the company changed, and so did the ethics. The medical supply wing was shut down, and work began on mass biofusion experiments and operations. Anyone who could afford it, some handing over their whole fortunes, were turned into engines. But, along with the new policy, there would be worse to come. Biofused engines would be allowed, then obliged, to work on the railways.
The first one we fired up was James. He didn't have the money some of these people had, and so agreed to basically sign his life away if they wanted to experiment further, or to take massive risks like this. As usual, the had everything recorded.
Accidents.
He'd been filming all day for the new TV.